Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to the Anaheim Ducks 2020 Post-Draft Show presented by Honda. After quite a break, Johnny and Hazy back with you. John Allers and Brian Hayward from the relative safety of parts unknown and what appears to be our own home. So glad to have you with us. Brian Hayward, so glad to see you. It has been over, well, I think 6 months since we broadcast any Ducks action, but this is a day of action and one to always get excited about.
Well, it certainly is, Johnny. Great to see you as well. You know, the interesting thing about the NHL draft, I actually like what Gary Bettman had to say about the draft. He said, you know, the draft is the foundation on which franchises are built. And when you think about it, Anaheim, the only team in the National Hockey League that had 2 first-round picks in last year's draft and in this summer's draft. So this was the opportunity. Bob Murray, Martin Madden, and their whole crew of 11 scouts spread around the globe to really reshape this franchise.
A lot of people working behind the scenes, obviously, to make the drafts happen from the war rooms. Interestingly enough, Bob Murray told me there's been a number of general managers over the years who have wanted to do a draft this way from their war rooms instead of being on the floor of the draft and coming together as one each year. He said sometimes it just gets so chaotic on the floor and there's too much going on at the table. So in a roundabout way, COVID provides their wish for them. A lot of people working behind the scenes for us here as well. We want to thank TCL for providing our wireless earphones for today's broadcast. And of course, the many people with the Anaheim Ducks making this possible. Obviously, Brian, the draft is always a day of intrigue and drama. Not a whole lot of drama at the top of the draft board. However, this one went chalk through the first 3 picks.
Yeah, it pretty much followed the script, didn't it? It was interesting going into the draft. I had the opportunity to speak at length with Martin Madden the other day, and he said, you know, obviously there's the top 3 picks that everyone talks about. Everyone knew that Lafreniere was going to go number 1. Then it was going to be Byfield and Stützle. But after that, players 4 through 12 are still considered to be impact players. So Madden at that point didn't know which player was going to be available to him, but he said, we're going to get an impact player, certainly with the 6th overall pick. I was a little bit surprised as the whole draft unfolded that there weren't more deals being made that involved players. There was a little bit of moving around for draft picks exchange. Calgary, in particular, moving down, accumulating some 3rd-round picks as they continued to move further and further down in the draft. But other than that, not a lot of activity, and overall, I would say very few surprises.
Yeah, there could be a little bit of gridlock going on right now. We've heard and read so much over the weeks and days ahead that teams are trying to shed salary cap or get some cap room, and maybe there's just too many teams to try to do that. But as this draft progressed, much as was the case last year, not so much creating drama, but maybe coming off the board and changing the prognostications. Once again, this year was the Detroit Red Wings. Remember last year at number 6, they picked Moritz Seider out of Germany and kind of surprised a lot of people. And when the chalk came through to number 4 and the Red Wings got on the board, they moved some of the chess pieces, Brian. That's when things started to move a little bit, although the top picks ended up going in the top positions. They just moved them around when they went overseas to Sweden, as Detroit does, and got Raymond, and that opened things up for the 6th pick overall. And the Anaheim Ducks went defense, and they ended up, Brian, getting the #1 defense prospect going in, although he was the 2nd defenseman picked in the draft in Jamie Drysdale.
Jamie Drysdale is an exciting player. And, the interesting thing about this is GMs always say that they take the best available player in the draft, but the Ducks, I think, filled a significant need in drafting Drysdale. Right-handed shot, power play performer, got a great shot. People talk about his skating ability. They say it is unique. They say he might be the best skating player, period, in the entire draft. Undersized, he's under 6 feet tall, but boy, right-hand shot, the ability to control a power play, I think that's something that Anaheim's been looking for some time.
We also heard about his character, Brian, and perhaps the ability down the line to run a power play. Certainly we know that the Ducks have had their problems with that, but some of the things I heard some scouts say is control a game from the back end, something he's been able to do in playing for the Erie Otters at the OHL level. And of course, we've seen so many players, young players, come into the league and be able to do that. It reminded me a little bit, certainly not the way Cam Fowler fell, but the last time a defenseman fell a little bit to the Anaheim Ducks, of course, was Fowler, who's still here now going into his 9th NHL season. He's a cornerstone. He's part of the core. Is Drysdale the type of player you think that could potentially, within a couple of years, maybe be compared to a Cale Makar with his ability to drive a game from the back end and also be a cornerstone piece, much as Fowler has been?
Yeah, that's one of the names that you hear in terms of comparables for him. And so that's a pretty exciting name for us to hear, certainly, because we've seen how dynamic Cale Makar is for the Avalanche. It is interesting, 47 points in 49 games for the Erie Otters. So this is a modern day NHL defenseman. He's going to be up on the rush all the time, but he's got great vision. He has the ability to lead the attack and to drive the play. Good passer as well. So when you think about Anaheim and the fact that they had difficulty scoring goals, difficulty on the power play, I think this is a pretty darn exciting pick for the Ducks.
Well, and you mentioned the need to score more goals. Obviously, in the last few years, the Ducks have tried to refill the cupboard, if you will, down the middle with picks of Sam Steele and Isaac Lundestrom, and last year, Trevor Zegras down the middle. So if you were going to look at a forward, you had to think if Anaheim held on to that second first-round pick at number 27, it would be a winger. And sure enough, it was, as we mentioned, not a lot of movement, not all the trades that were expected. There had been some speculation that Anaheim might package that second first rounder with a second rounder to try to move up or even move down or what have you. None of that took place. It didn't materialize. So they end up going with Jacob Perreault. They dip into the NHL gene pool, if you will, as they get a young player out of Sarnia in the OHL who has some speed and he's got a scoring touch.
That's what he's known for. He's a sniper. His dad, Yannick Perreault, was known more as a defensive centerman, his face-off prowess. He led the league, I don't know how many years in a row, in terms of face-off winning percentage. This is a much different player than his father, however. This is a pure goal scorer, considered to be one of the top goal scorers in the draft, right-handed shot, plays the right wing. It is interesting when you think about the Ducks right now and you look at the right side, and of course you've got Jakob Silfverberg at the top of the list on the right wing. They do have some pretty good depth. Troy Terry's a right winger. There's Ricard Raquel at times has moved over to the right side. It'll be interesting to see Jacob Perreault when we get a real good look at him in Anaheim. He starts playing with NHL players. What I like about the analysis of Perreault is that people talk about his skating ability, and that for me allows younger players make the jump a lot quicker into the NHL. If you can skate with the big boys, when you have those types of hands and that finishing touch that he possesses, it's a lot more likely that we see him sooner rather than later in an Anaheim uniform.
Yeah, it's a big speed upgrade for Anaheim. And it's interesting, you and I were talking earlier in the day about some of the players that have been picked where. I went back and I looked at some of the better picks at number 27 recently in the last couple of decades. John Carlson was a 27th overall pick. So was Scott Gomez of the New Jersey Devils, who won 3 Stanley Cups. The Ducks also selected Jacob Larson in 2015 at 27, but at 28, Brian, I think you remember in 2003, the Ducks cobbled a trade late in that first round and moved up to pick up a fellow by the name of Corey Perry. And Ducks fans know that the rest is history. That's the point in the draft sometimes where you feel like teams are just picking the best available player. You're not picking for need. But let's go back and look at how this first round went overall. Let's take a look at all of the picks. We'll have to do it over a course of a couple of graphics here. But at least at the top of the draft, Brian, sometimes you see teams not necessarily taking the best player available, but trying to pick for some needs, don't you?
Yeah, you know what? I think there was some question at the very top of the draft whether LA, with the second pick overall, was going to go to Byfield or Stützle, but they decided on the big center. They took Quinton Byfield. There wasn't a lot of movement. As mentioned, the top 12 players taken in the draft are considered to be absolute gems, impact players, players that have the potential to have outstanding careers. There will be some Hall of Famers in the mix amongst those top 12. I don't think there's any question about that. And there weren't a lot of surprises. There really were not. But when it came down to that, decision for which defenseman would Ottawa take at 5 or 6, it was between Sanderson or Drysdale. I think the Ducks are happy that the Sens took Sanderson, and because that gave them the right-handed shooting power play quarterback that the Ducks have really been coveting for some time.
So then you go through, and as you mentioned, not a lot of movement. The bottom half of the draft saw Calgary move down twice, originally from 19th to 22nd, and then to 24th. A couple of players who maybe had some medical issues that were taken later on in the draft. Justin Barron, a defenseman, was taken in there, and there was one other pick. I'm drawing a blank on the player
Lapierre.
Hendrix Lapierre that went late. And that brings me, Brian, to I guess as we look back, and we will look back on this draft as the COVID draft of 2020, and uncle we give on 2020. But really, this draft was changed so much because there ended up being no Memorial Cup. There ended up being no combine. And in talking to scouts and general managers, the one thing that was universal was everyone said, we need that combine, that testing. So there were some leaps of faith, I think, that we won't know about for quite a while, as is the nature of the draft.
I think it's going to be really interesting because when you think about the pause from COVID-19, what have these kids been doing in the interim? Well, they've been training. They've been living in the weight room. I think a lot of these kids are going to be 5-10 pounds heavier from the point when they're drafted to, or when the scouts last seen them live, to when they show up at their first National Hockey League training camp. They're going to be bigger. They're stronger. I think it's going to benefit them. And I think it's going to create more opportunity for these young players to make an impact earlier in their career than normally we consider a recently drafted player to be able to make. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. I'm sure that the Ducks will be able to see these players physically, up close and personal, in the real near term here. And that's when those types of evaluations are going to happen. But it's after they've been drafted. It has been a strange time for all of us, certainly for the NHL scouts, unable to see players perform in those pressure situations during the playoffs, during the NCAA championships, during the Canadian Hockey League championships, those players in Europe, unable to see them perform for their respective team in the playoffs. It has made it a little bit more challenging. But Martin Madden said the other day, he said, we probably watched more video. We've probably had the opportunity to have more conversations with these players than we've ever had in the past. They've got to know their personalities, I think, a little bit more in depth than they have in years past.
One other unique advent of this draft as well, an aspect that no one could have ever expected, is that some of these players that were being drafted, particularly from Europe, have already begun another season. We've seen a lot of teams send some of their young prospects over to play in the second division in Sweden or to play in the Finnish league with the possibility of bringing them back when the NHL does return. And that was also an interesting development in the draft, in that Gary Bettman did make an official announcement that the league is now targeting January the 1st as a potential start date, no longer December the 1st. But now you've got players that are already playing for their teams over in Europe that were drafted. Let's move on and look ahead. There is a 2nd through 7th round that will take place beginning tomorrow as well, virtually, as was the case today. But I mentioned earlier, Brian, that restocking the shelves has been the job for the Ducks and has been job one and priority one the last couple of drafts. You look back, there is a high second round pick coming tomorrow. So you're going to get 3 in the top 36 this year. They got 3 picks in the first 2 rounds last year. Now there are a number of players, not only prospects, but also on the roster that are 22 and younger for the Anaheim Ducks.
Well, you look at the left side, you got Max Comtois, 21, Jones is 22, Sonny Milano, who just re-signed, is just 24. Braden Tracy, of course, last year's first rounder, is 19. Those are all left wingers. Remember, Rickard Rakell likes to play on the left side. He's just 27. In the middle, you've got Trevor Zegras, who's 19. Sam Steele is 22. Isaac Lundestrom is just 20. On the right side, Troy Terry's just 23. Now, you add Perreault into the mix as well. So there's a lot of young talent, especially on the forward lines. Drysdale, of course, is going to be a real interesting player to watch at the upcoming training camp, whatever that is.
A friendly reminder, you're watching the Anaheim Ducks 2020 Draft Post Show presented by Honda. And now you add to those names players we haven't seen here. You've got Zegras, you've got Braden Tracy from last year, you've got Jackson Lacombe. Those were the 3 picks that were taken in the first and second round. And then, of course, with the development today of Drysdale and Perreault, and now another pick, as we mentioned, will be the 5th pick in the second round come tomorrow. I don't know that you ever feel like you've sufficiently restocked the shelves, Brian, but I know Bob Murray has mentioned on numerous occasions to us and publicly that trying to rebuild a franchise is something he has always wanted to do at some point in time as a general manager. I would say these last 2 years, he's gone a long way in doing that.
Yeah, his 2 primary objectives were to get younger and get faster. And if you look at the draft picks taken last year and this year, I think they all kind of fit that bill. And some of the moves that the Ducks have made to change this roster over, really turn it over, have certainly moved the team in that direction. When are we going to start? Well, you mentioned, John, that the commissioner came on and said they're right now shooting for January 1st as the potential date. My own personal opinion is this: the NHL has to play this next season, no matter what. All the other leagues are playing. The NFL is playing. Major League Baseball is playing. They're going to play this season. It's just really a question of when they get started. One thing that will be interesting to see, I know that Bob Murray and the general managers of the other teams that were not involved in the play-in round in this past playoff round requested extra time, an extra week or 2 of training camp prior to the start of the next regular season, because their players have not been in a competitive environment for so much longer than the other teams that did participate in the postseason. There has been no decision made on that. I expect that we're going to hear something about that in the next couple of weeks. And at that point, you and I are going to know when we're getting back to work to watch training camp.
And we're both looking forward to that greatly. I know that the one question mark I think that remains as they continue to push dates back, and of course we could go on and on about all the different decisions that need to be made, is there is an Olympic Games at the end of July, at least scheduled for now. If you're going to try to have a full season and you don't start until January 1st, you're going to have to do a lot more than eliminate an all-star break and a 5-day break for teams to be done with your season and your playoffs in time to get out of the way for the Olympic Games, which of course are covered by NBC and NBC Sportsnet, which carries the playoffs for the National Hockey League, at least here in the United States. Otherwise, if you play an 82-game season beginning in January and full playoffs, you're not going to finish until September again. And at some point, I think, Brian, I don't know, perhaps you know more than I, but at some point, I think they want to get this calendar back to normal.
Yeah, it'll start the following season, hopefully. I mean, that's the assumption that we're all making. What can we expect from next year? A lot of 3 games and 4 nights. I think the depth of every team's roster is really going to be under pressure, because there will be injuries when the games are that, and the schedule is that compacted.
Well, the only thing we know is we'll have to stay tuned, as we will stay tuned tomorrow. Rounds 2 through 7 of the National Hockey League draft continuing. Ducks have the 5th pick in the second round, and Maybe we'll see more activity with trades. Only time will tell. The one thing we do know is Fox Sports Prime Ticket and Fox Sports San Diego and Fox Sports Go will be re-airing 12 Ducks Classic playoff games beginning October the 6th through the 29th. Visit AnaheimDucks.com for dates and times on those. So if you're jonesing for some more hockey now that the playoffs are over, we can do that. Hopefully, Brian, next time we will see one another in person. But thank you so much for your insight. Great to see you. Continued good health to you and yours, and we'll continue to adhere to all the social distancing as we have done here tonight on this Ducks post-draft show. For Brian Hayward, I'm John Aller saying this has been the 2020 Anaheim Ducks post-draft show brought to you by Honda.